All right, let's get right into it. We're doing a deep dive today on a question that you sent in, and it's one that's been debated forever, basically.
Hmm.
Can we laugh our way to a better world?
Ooh, that's a big one.
Yeah, and we've got a whole stack of sources here from this Moment Symposium with cartoonists,
Love it.
comedians, journalists, politicians,
Yeah.
all weighing in on the power of satire.
Sounds like a fascinating mix. And probably some pretty strong opinions, too.
Totally. So to even start, how do we define satire?
Right. Got to start with the basics.
Exactly. Well, luckily, one of our sources, Robert Mankoff, he's a cartoon editor at The New Yorker. He's got a pretty good definition, I think. He says it's about exposing the gap between appearances and reality, in public life.
Oh, yeah. Using humor to kind of point out those hypocrisies and things we might miss in everyday life.
And it's funny, because one of the articles even mentions Aristotle.
Oh, wow. Going way back.
Way
now.
back, yeah. In ancient Greece, he believed that using ridicule could actually correct bad behavior.
Hmm.
Makes you wonder if, folks back then were just as frustrated with politics.
I think it's safe to say human nature is pretty consistent, across the ages. And this idea that humor can be a tool for social commentary, that's something Dave Barry talks about, too.
Oh, yeah, he's great.
He says that political satire is almost a natural response, to that inherent skepticism we have about people in power.
Yeah, we can't help but laugh at the gap between their promises and reality.
Exactly, exactly.
But okay, so satire, maybe it's a natural human impulse, but does it actually work? If we're all laughing at the same, political blunders,
Right.
shouldn't things be changing, for the better?
It's a good question. And it gets even more interesting when you start looking at the whole debate about whether satire has, a built-in political bias.
Oh, yeah, because some people say it does, right?
Absolutely. David Brooks, he's the columnist of the New York Times, makes a case that satire can actually be kind of conservative.
Conservative.
Not necessarily in a party political way,
Right.
but more in how it often compares the problems of today with some perfect, romanticized version of the past.
Oh, so things were better back when.
Exactly. Exactly.
Makes you wonder if some satire maybe resists change
Interesting.
instead of pushing for it.
Yeah.
But then we have Alison Dagnes, who's a political science professor, and she sees satire as the language of the underdog,
Oh, interesting.
challenging those in power, pushing for a better future.
So it's like two sides of the same coin,
Definitely. I think it's important to remember that it's not just about the message itself, it's also about who's saying it
Oh, that's a good point.
and why. Dagnes's perspective might explain why so many satirists we see lean more towards, progressive causes. It's all about using humor to fight for those who aren't in power.
Oh, that actually makes me think of, my own experience. Do you ever feel like the comedy that you enjoy, leans one way or the other? That's a great point. I think it's definitely something to be aware of as we kind of dive deeper into this whole thing.
Definitely, yeah. But before we get into that, there's this other fascinating thread I noticed in all these sources, and it's about this Jewish legacy of laughter.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And Rabbi Moshe Waldoks,
Wow.
he's a rabbi and a comedian, which is kind of cool. He traces it all the way back to the scroll of Esther,
Oh, wow. Really?
which, believe it or not, actually satirizes the Persian court.
Hmm. That's fascinating.
So it's using humor to poke fun at powerful people, especially untouchable ones. It's a tradition that goes back centuries.
It's incredible how these themes kind of resonate across such vast periods of time.
Totally. And it's not just, ancient history. Think about the impact Jewish humor has had on American culture,
Yeah.
Wordplay, puncturing pomposity, calling out hypocrisy. It's everywhere.
Oh, for sure. And it's still evolving.
Mm.
Eddie Portnoy, he's a scholar of Yiddish language and culture. He talks about this historical magazine called Der Greuzer-Kundes.
Yeah.
It's like a Yiddish version of Mad Magazine mixed with The Onion.
Oh.
It was a way for the Jewish community to critique both their own internal politics and American society at large. And it was all through satire.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and it didn't stop there. Today, you have cartoonists like Eli Valley. They're still using their art to spark conversations and debates within the Jewish community, often using satire to address those contemporary challenges.
It's amazing to see how this tradition of using humor to make a point has evolved over time.
Absolutely.
But how does it fit into today's world where everything is so fast-paced?
That's a great question. And I think it's the perfect lead into what we're going to talk about next. With the rise of social media, 24/7 news cycle,
Right.
satire has had to adapt. So let's explore how the digital age has transformed, how we laugh at, well, everything, really.
Let's do it. Yeah, it really is amazing to think about how something like satire can go from ancient Greece to the age of Twitter.
Right, like some things never change.
Exactly.
And Andy Borowitz actually touches on that. He's the guy behind the Borowitz report, you know?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, he quotes Will Rogers, who said, "Everything is changing. People are taking their comedians seriously and the politicians as a joke."
Oh, that's good. And it makes you wonder if, like, the targets of satire, if they've always been kind of the same, you know?
Yes.
That craving for power, the hypocrisy, you know, the little moments of absurdity
Totally.
that politicians can never seem to avoid.
But you're right. The way we actually, like, consume satire, that has changed.
For sure, yeah. I mean, we're constantly bombarded with information now.
Oh, yeah.
And humor has become like this instant reaction, you know?
Yeah, it's like how we process the chaos
Yeah.
in real time.
One of our sources, Rob Kuttner, he's written for shows like Conan, he points out how many forms satire takes these days.
Ugh.
It's not just like late night monologues anymore.
Right, right.
Like you've got quick Twitter jokes, memes that go viral, and then shows like The Daily Show, you know, offering these deeper dives.
Yeah, it's like a whole spectrum of
Yeah,
satirical content.
exactly.
And it's fascinating, you know, how technology has changed it all, made it much more accessible,
Yeah.
much more, like, instant.
For sure. But it also raises some questions about the impact of all this, you know, fast-paced humor. Like, can a meme really change someone's mind about something?
Right. Or does it just make us feel like we're in on the joke,
Yeah.
even if it's just for, like, a minute?
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's almost like, is it making things better or is it just adding to the noise?
Exactly.
Yeah. And then there's just so much noise out there now.
It's true.
It's hard to know what to trust, you know, or even who to take seriously.
Right.
Which kind of brings us back to that big question from before, right? Can satire actually change minds?
And, you know, we actually saw some pretty strong opinions about that in the symposium.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Barney Frank, you know, the former congressman,
Yeah.
he argues that, like, satirizing the whole political system can actually lead to apathy, especially for people who want to see, like, real change.
It's like, if we're always laughing at how messed up everything is,
Right.
then why even try to fix it?
Exactly. You just become, like, desensitized to the
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah, and maybe you even start to accept them as, like, inevitable.
Exactly. And that's his concern, you know?
Right.
Which is, I think, valid.
Yeah.
But then Peter Segal, he's the host of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me.
Oh, yeah, he's great.
He kind of offers a counterpoint.
Great.
He sees satire as a way to cope, you know, a way to process the often frustrating realities of politics.
Yeah, you got to find the funny side of things sometimes.
Exactly. Got to keep your sanity when it feels like the world's going crazy.
I.
And he also makes a good point about the neutrality of humor, you know, because, yeah, every comedian has their own perspective.
Right.
But the goal of a good laugh can be a welcome break from all that, like, you know.
Yeah, the hyperpartisanship we see everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a place where we can come together, you know, regardless of what we believe, and just share a moment of amusement.
Totally, totally. And then it's also important to remember that, you know, satire can be really effective at taking like a complex truth and distilling it down into something memorable.
Oh, yeah.
Impactful, even.
Rebecca Traister, she writes a lot about politics and gender. She has a great example of this. She mentions Tina Fey's Sarah Palin impression on SNL.
Oh, classic.
Right. And it wasn't just funny. It actually captured something like really profound about how gender and power dynamics play out in politics, you know?
It's like, you know, straight news report might have missed that.
Yeah, totally.
But satire cuts right through.
So I guess that brings us to another question then. If satire can be so powerful, you know, even shape our understanding of these big issues, what's our responsibility as, you know, the audience?
Yeah, it's like, can we really rely on satire to, like, keep us informed? It's funny, but is it news?
It's a good question. And Paula Poundstone, the comedian, she actually cautions us about getting all our news from, like, satirical shows.
Makes sense.
It's entertainment first, and
Yeah.
it shouldn't be your only source of information.
Right, because even the most brilliant satire is coming from someone's perspective. Right?
Exactly. But then you have someone like Gene Weingarten. He's a humor columnist, won a Pulitzer, and he argues that satire can expose the truth
Okay.
by exaggerating things.
Oh, interesting.
He even talks about a piece he wrote where he compared Dick Cheney to Satan.
Oh, wow. That's
It's satire, obviously,
Right.
but it gets you thinking.
Yeah, like, it's not meant to be taken literally,
Right.
but it makes you see things in a new way. Exactly. It highlights a truth that might be harder to hear if it was presented in a, serious way.
And these days, it feels like everyone's a satirist, right?
It really does. Barrington Thurston, he's a comedian and entrepreneur. He even talks about this rise of like unofficial satirists online. With Twitter and everything, you know, anyone can be a commentator.
Right. It's like blurred the lines between professional comedians and just, people with a Twitter account.
Exactly. Everyone has a voice now.
But does that make satire more effective? Or does it just like add to all the noise and make it even harder to, see what's real?
It's something to think about, for sure. But I think no matter who's making it, Judy Gold, she's another comedian, she reminds us that humor can really connect us.
Oh, that's a good point.
It disarms us, even when we disagree with someone.
Yeah, for sure. It's like you can see them as a person,
Yeah, like a human being.
not just like, their political stance or whatever.
It reminds me of when Mitt Romney went on that Al Smith dinner a few years back,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and he was actually, like, funny.
Yeah, I remember that.
It didn't change how I felt about his politics,
Right.
but it made him seem more, relatable.
Totally, totally. And it's interesting, so many of these sources point out that satire isn't just an American thing. Like, it's all over the world.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You've got Eretz Nehederet in Israel,
Yeah.
El Burmeg in Egypt, Tash Matash in Saudi Arabia. They're all using humor to talk about these really, like, sensitive issues.
And like proof that laughter is this universal language, It
Yeah.
connects us no matter where we're from or what we believe.
It shows that maybe we're not so different after all.
Hmm.
We all find humor in the same things, especially when it comes to politics.
Okay, so we've talked about the history of satire, how it's changed, all these different opinions on it. But we can't wrap up without looking at the data, right?
You're right. There was this Pew Research Center poll that found that people who watch those satirical news shows, like The Daily Show, The Colbert Report,
Oh, yeah.
they're actually more informed about current events than people who get their news from, like, traditional sources.
That's pretty wild.
It is. And for young people, those shows are sometimes their main source of news.
Wow. So it's saying that satire, when it's done well, can be a really effective way to make people think about these complex issues.
It definitely suggests that. But then there was this other study
Okay.
in the International Journal of Public Opinion Research, and they found that political comedy can actually sometimes make people feel more alienated from politics
Really?
and even less likely to participate.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it shows that satire has all these different effects. It can be, informative and thought-provoking, but it can also make people feel like the system is just too messed up to even try to fix.
Right, like what's the point?
Exactly.
So where does that leave us? Like what's the takeaway from all this?
I think the main point is that satire is a really powerful tool, but it's not a solution in itself. It can spark conversations, point out hypocrisy, help us deal with the craziness of the world, but you have to be aware of its limits. And, don't just rely on satire for all your information.
Well said. So if you're listening, as you keep navigating this world of satire, keep laughing, keep thinking, and, keep looking for different perspectives.
And maybe all that laughter will help make the world a little bit better.
This deep dive has been a wild ride. We've seen how humor can be like a weapon, a shield, even a bridge. It's powerful stuff, and it's not going anywhere. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and remember, keep laughing.